Good morning and happy Sabbath. If you care to join a Zoom class, the Interactive Sabbath School, you're welcome to do so. That, of course, the codes and passwords and things can be found in the weekly e-newsletter that comes out from the church. But since you're with us, glad you're here for Lesson 7. Wow, Lesson 7 already. The defeat of the Assyrians. Before you know, it'll be Lesson 13. In any case, let's start with prayer.
Father, thank you. Thank you. You've been so good to us this week. We're grateful that you have watched over us, that you've given us life and strength, and that you've given us the ability to choose each day to serve you, to be able to be with you. And I pray that we'll take advantage of the opportunities we have here in America to be able to study freely, to share freely. And I pray that you'll be with us. Send your Spirit to guide our hearts, our minds, and our thoughts. Thank you so much for all that you do. For we pray in your name. Amen. So looking at this, the memory text. How about a change? You can read the memory text this week.
You or you?
You.
Oh, alrighty. Well, I'm not going to read it from the lesson because I don't like the New King James Version. That's just a personal taste, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it by any means, but it's just not what I like to read. I don't know why, but it is. In any case, we're reading from the American New Revised Standard Version, Isaiah 37:16, which reads, O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, who are enthroned above the cherubim, you are God, you alone. Of all the kingdoms of the earth, you have made heaven and earth.
So acknowledging God and who he is, we need to be doing that every single day. We need to be paying attention to it. We need to be talking about it to other people and acknowledging God in our lives in so many different ways. And, often we don't take the opportunity, and that's part of what this lesson is. While it's about the defeat of the Assyrians, it's more about why were they defeated and what was so significant about that as we look. At the beginning of the lesson for the first day, in your lesson on 52, if you're in the regular quarterly, they just tell a little bit about those people who came before the Assyrian king and the Assyrian conqueror, Sennacherib.
Sennacherib.
Okay.
That's how I've always heard it pronounced historically. Sennacherib.
Okay.
So, well-documented king of the era.
And when
700s BCs. I won't interrupt again, sorry. Yeah, right.
That would be my dream. When we look at this, what we can know is that the people who were coming before were groveling to find favor. And that's one of the things that I think is so significant about God, is that he doesn't ask us to grovel, to climb up cold stone steps on our hands and knees. He doesn't ask us to flail ourselves or to do self-harm. He just says, come, let's reason together. Come boldly before my throne. He offers so much to us. And are we doing that every morning? Are we taking the time to approach his throne every day? It's important.
This part of the history of the tribes of Israel and Judah. Israel is already pretty much wiped out at this point in time, but it's another vindication and proof, so to speak, that these events recorded in the Bible are true, because we have the source of Sennacherib, and like I mentioned, it goes into Sunday's lesson, around 700 BC in his palace, the murals on the wall and the things that they chronicle, again, bespeak of what's written here in the Bible.
And always you can find that the Bible and history, especially of this time, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, they were way into writing about themselves. They were making history and they were deciding who won, and they were writing every documentation always.
In their day.
And when we look at the Bible chronicles, we have First and Second Chronicles, First and Second Kings. We have biblical, historical relevance together when we look at it. And we know that Ahaz dies, and we know that his son Hezekiah, who is called the Faithful, will succeed him. And there will begin to be a bit of a change in the downhill slide, I don't know how else to describe it, toward the Roman conquerors, basically.
Well, not only that, but we see when Hezekiah takes the throne, he was one of the few of the good kings of Judah.
Yes.
He destroyed all the idols and things that had been set up by Ahaz, and brought about a reformation. And that is very pertinent to the setting of these events in this week's lesson, because of how he and God, their relationship, and how it works out. But what I found interesting is the lesson, I think it was in this lesson, because in my school, our current units of study deal with the kings of Judah and Israel also. And Hezekiah's son, who ruled after him, had a longer rule, but was a horrible king. And it's like, wait, how come bad kings have long rules?
We don't know.
In any case, I just found that interesting because Hezekiah got an additional chunk. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go ahead. In Sunday's lesson, strings attached.
Yeah.
Indeed, that's how it seemed to be, but
When we look at Hezekiah, Hezekiah really wanted, he wanted to be able to be a successful king. And I think he wanted to protect Judah. And unlike his father, who was kind of a wheeler dealer, he is going to try to clean up the mess that his father had made. He realizes that the Syrian army has kind of how shall I say, transferred power from Sargon II, the second, who will die on a battlefield. But the Assyrians, in the areas that they had managed to control, were all about, here's a vulnerable spot. So Hezekiah actually thought that he could move in and protect Jerusalem.
by fortifications, by ensuring their water supply, by having storehouses full of foodstuffs, so to speak.
Exactly.
Creating temporal security.
But he also had gone around and tried to provide spiritual leadership by removing all the, you can go to this place, this place, this place,
Taking down the
God,
idols
and all the gods that have been there,
yes,
and bringing it back to Jerusalem about worshiping God.
the God, capital
But
G.
when you look at this, it's kind of interesting to look at Ellen White and Patriarchs and Prophets. But the king of Judah had determined to do his part in preparing to resist the enemy, and having accomplished all that human ingenuity and energy could do, he had assembled his forces and had exhorted them to be of good courage. So if we look at Hezekiah and how he is meeting the Assyrians, it says, why did he put so much effort on his own?
God helps those who help themselves.
Well, that's a nice puritanical statement, isn't it? Did his work negate, his faith? And the answer would be in Philippians 2:12 and 13.
And that's my cue to turn over to the New Testament. And Philippians 2, 12 and 13, it reads, "Therefore, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed me, not only in my presence, but much more now that in my absence. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. So it sounds like perhaps Hezekiah was doing God's will in this point because it would reassure the people that,
All
yeah,
was being done.
we're going to be ready. It's okay. We're doing all we can do, and that old saying, all you can do is all you can do. You can't do no more. That's where they were.
Well, and I think one of the things that we look at in our world today, and we ask, well, where are the miracles? Well, if you can do something and you can show that this is what humanity can do, God can go so far beyond that. But often we sit back and we go, well, where's the miracle? Well, that's like on Sabbath, if I were to say to Thom and to my father-in-law, so I'm waiting for God to perform a miracle. He's going to make dinner for us today.
We'd be going hungry.
Honestly, God asks us to do what we can. If we were impoverished and, hanging on by a thread.
Hadn't eaten in 3 days.
And I said, God will provide food. Well, maybe one of my Eagle Rock friends would bring me food. But honestly, we look at this and we look at the idea of providing leadership. What does that mean? What does that mean to work and to do? When we're working, God is working in us. And he's giving us energy. I know there are days that I don't have a stitch of energy left. And I have more to do. And I ask God, just get me over the final finish line, right? Get me over that line so that I can be done. And invariably, I have energy to finish things out. And that's really what God is promising. He's promising to work. And if a miracle is called for, like we're going to see, that's what will happen.
Monday's lesson, propaganda. We're studying the American history, I should say histories of the Americas in 5th grade. And this is the first time, perhaps, that students are introduced to propaganda, which of course is telling your story the way you want to be told. Today we call it spin, but it can be very useful in persuasion. Oftentimes, propaganda is to get people to think a certain way. And the Assyrians were masters at this, indeed, because their reputation was well known. And, you just had to say, here come the Assyrians, and there'd be great shaking and trembling in their boots of the people to whom the Assyrians were approaching.
And so propaganda, the king of Assyria sent an emissary.
What's that emissary's name, dear, or title?
Well, you're going to, because you're the expert at it.
I was hoping she would try to do it. I was looking at it again, and all week I've been going, Rabshaka,
was like the ambassador. Yeah. And he came, and he was very persuasive.
Trust the Egyptians. They're weak. Look, here's the deal.
Yeah. So don't trust the Egyptians. Don't depend on the Lord. The Lord has already made sure Assyrian, look at all we've won.
Yeah, look
at the past.
Israel's gone. We got rid of them. So come on.
And, you'll have nothing to eat and drink. Well, it was that bullying. You won't have anything left. And then you don't have a military. You don't even have people who could fight for you. And then, by the way, Hezekiah, he can't help you. He can't save you. Because the gods, God has made sure that we've won. So why would you trust him? when he says, let's trust God. All of those things.
Well, they point to the gods of the other nations to which they've overtaken, not to the God. So basically saying the other gods did nothing for the nation, so what do you think your God's going to do for you? And, the truth is that Hezekiah's God is a living God, not a stone or wooden statue.
Yeah. So when we look at the partway down on Monday's lesson, it says, was Rabshakeh telling the truth?
Well,
Yes.
yes, from his vantage point.
But it was also true, partially true.
Well, he didn't know their God. He didn't know the God of Israel. So to him, it was truth, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Look at all these things we've done. We're going to do it to you too.
But when you look at it, though, it also is about understanding that his truth was close enough and compelling enough that if you didn't have the personal faith,
From the human
it was true.
standpoint,
It
from the
was
human
true.
standpoint alone, there was nothing to stop the Assyrian army of that day. Nothing.
And that's kind of what happens all the time. Satan did that. He put the truth so close to Eve, the truth so close, that it was, but who are you really going to believe? And that is one of the things that makes propaganda work.
Well, and, Satan's comment to Eve was, look, I'm eating of the fruit. I'm not dying. Chomp, chomp, chomp. Oh, it tastes so good, too.
Yeah. These people are hearing all this propaganda. And I was looking at, now I can't remember exactly. I'm going to go back, though, because I think it was, Deuteronomy. I think it was Deuteronomy. Can you look at that Deuteronomy?
Yes, I don't see where you're seeing it in this lesson, but sure, I can look at Deuteronomy 19, verse 16. Have that marked here. We marked it ahead of time. 19:16 tells us, if a malicious witness comes forward to accuse someone of wrongdoing.
Okay, that's jumping ahead of me.
Oh, and then that's it.
That's not the one I was looking for. Maybe it's here. When we look at the idea that's presented right here, I'm sorry, it actually is in the verses here. They are desperate. And so if you go to 36.
Are you in Isaiah, dear?
Yes, Isaiah 36.
Isaiah 36.
And go to verse 13.
36:13. Then Rabshakeh stood and called out in a loud voice the language of Judah. So he speaks Hebrew. Wow. Hear the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus saith the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you. Do not let Hezekiah make you rely on the Lord, that's capital Lord, by saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city will not be given unto the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus saith the king of Assyria, make your peace with me, and come out to me. Then every one of you will eat from your own vine, and from your own fig tree, and drink the water from your own cistern, until I come to take you away to the land like your own land, a land of grain and wine, a land of bread and vineyards. Do not let Hezekiah mislead you by saying, the Lord will save us. Has any of the gods of the nations saved their land out from the hand of the king of Assyria? No, the gods of Hamath and of Arpad, where are the gods of the Sepharian? Have they delivered Samaria out of the hand? Who among all the gods of these countries have saved you? Their countries out of my hand? The Lord should save Jerusalem out of my hand. Should the Lord save Jerusalem out of my hand? Well, there you see the propaganda. He's giving them evidentiary proof.
Yeah.
The gods
In
of the
their own
nations
language.
haven't saved anybody.
Yeah.
Why
In-
will your God?
Yeah, and exactly. When you look at it, it's why should you trust anything but me? Because I'm bringing you and I'm telling you in your own language. And when you think about that, if somebody comes from outside and it can be try to be convincing, people are desperate. And where do you go when all seems lost? Who who do you trust? Who do you look to? And I was thinking about that. It asks, have you ever been in a similar situation? I think I've been in a similar situation several times, where I felt like I had no recourse. And when you finally get to that point and you say, okay, God, I'm going to stop worrying. I have had people who have tried to discount what I do in teaching. And, I had people saying, oh, well, this is what you should do. Oh, this is what you should do. Oh,
Were they speaking your own language?
Yes, they were. And really trying to be supportive. But part of the problem is when we begin to trust other people, when we begin to put our faith in what humans can do, God already knows the way through. He knows what's on the other side. And so often we want to let other people lead us through because it seems easier than trusting God. But after months of fussing on my part, to say, all right, God, I'm going to keep doing what I do to the very best of my ability. The rest is going to be yours. And within 4 months, done. Just done. And that's only God. It's not me. It's not what other people have said. It's only God. Because He knows and He works outside of my purview. And that's what these people in Monday's lesson don't realize. God's already working outside of their purview. They don't know. They don't understand. And that's how, for me, it's so important to recognize, look at all the times God had led them in the past. They had stories, generations,
Hundreds of years.
hundreds of years of proof. And yet they're like, should we trust these people?
Well, if they just look back on their own history when they came into Canaan, they came upon the land of the giants, and what did God do? He sent hornets to get rid of them. I mean, miraculous dealings, but they seem to I shouldn't keep pointing to they. We seem to forget how God leads us. And that old saying, if we just look to see how God has led us in the past, we would not fear the future.
Yeah. So Tuesday's lesson with Hezekiah, what does Hezekiah do? Hezekiah he's done all he can. Now he is in distress and he seeks God humbly. Now in the Teacher's Quarterly, it's kind of interesting because it looks at his prayer. And I'd like to look at it because I think that it's really a beautiful prayer. Isaiah 37:16.
Just happen to have that verse right here.
Thank you.
37:16 begins, O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, who are enthroned above the cherubim, you are God, you alone. Of all the kingdoms of the earth, you have made heaven and earth. Oh, our memory verse.
Yeah.
And then it goes on, verses 17 and onward. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see. Hear all the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste all the nations in their land, and have hurled their gods into the fire, though they were no gods, but their work of human hands, wood and stone. And so they were destroyed. So now, O Lord, our God, save us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of earth may know that you alone are Lord. You know, that rings to me kind of what Moses did at one point in time when the Lord was, we're going to put human characteristics on him now, sick and tired of hearing the whiny Israelites complain all the time, and said, "Get out of the way, Moses, I'm going to wipe them out." And Moses said, No, wait, you can't do that. What will the nations around think of you if you do? So, again, Hezekiah is saying, let the nations know around us that you are God, the true God, truly, Lord, and only.
Yeah. And that idea that all the kingdoms will know.
Kind of saying, prove yourself. Let everybody know. Let them see for themselves, because it was out, like Tracy said, it was out of their purview. They did not see, because they didn't have the relationship that was necessary for them to be able to see God and God's dealings in their lives.
And often we look at things that happen to us in our lives, and particularly when they're public, and we think, oh God, this is just horrible. Look what it's making me look like. Don't you even care? And for Hezekiah, it wasn't about that the guy was dissing him. It was really about, you are Lord of all, and let them know who you are. That's what I want. It's not about me, it's about you, God, and how you will look to the other nations. And could that be something that we could apply in our own lives each day? Lord, don't let me be so self-conscious that I'm worried about how I'm going to look. May it be about how you're going to look. And that is such an important part. Sometimes we have people who will say something negatively over and over and over, as if that can make it the truth. And we see that in the world today, everywhere around us. Oh my goodness, right now, it's just everywhere in the news. If I say it over and over, it must make it true. And Hezekiah did not buy into that. He said, no, this is the God I know, and he will come through for us. And so as we move to Wednesday's lesson, we're looking at the rest of the story.
Well, I didn't know Ralph's story was back at that time.
I know.
And the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So, again, this points to the historical setting that we know from outside the Bible, and the palace of Sennacherib, and the ways in which he made known his great achievements. But there's a very interesting lesson points out that there is a prominent blank, so to speak, where he doesn't deal anything with Judah. Yes.
Particularly Jerusalem.
Well, yes, that's true. The city of Jerusalem. He deals with Israel, of course, and how he took them and dispatched the tribes of Israel, but not of Judah. And Jerusalem is left alone. It's totally out of the record.
In a direct answer to Hezekiah's prayer. A direct answer. It's when you look at the history, the Bible tells the story. The Assyrians do not. You will not see that anywhere in Assyrian history. But God will prevail, and God will protect with his hand Jerusalem and those who have held him close.
So the rest of the story briefly is told in Isaiah 37, 21 to 37. And in essence, in a nutshell, things occur. Sennacherib gets reports of them and decides that maybe he just better leave Jerusalem alone and go take care of the other problems. And he goes back to his own home, and terrible things occur. 185,000 of his soldiers, 185,000 of his soldiers die mysteriously overnight. And in the near future, he too dies.
Yeah. So when you look at God already knew that, and that's the part, we have a hard time understanding how God can know the history, but not manipulate it like we are. That's the part that's so hard. But when God chooses to manipulate, well, we'll get to that. We'll get there.
Well, he doesn't manipulate, he acts. There's a difference between manipulation. There's such a negative connotation to that word.
Well, we do it selfishly, and God does it deliberately. And his isn't manipulation, it's just, let me show you my power.
It's, here, I'm going to act.
Yes, okay. So when we look at the rest of this, the nations around, they all knew. And the people of Jerusalem were so excited.
Something that, yes, I was going to get to that too before we move on, off of Wednesday's lesson. Here again, you see Satan's attempt to wipe out the potential line of the Messiah. If the lesson points out that if Sennacherib had been successful in his conquest of Jerusalem, destroying the tribe of Judah,
and setting them off wherever, like
scattering them about or totally obliterating them, there would be no ancestral line for Jesus. Kind of like he tried to do in Egypt with the slavery, killing all the baby boys. It's been a consistent battle, of course, because if the line can be destroyed, how can the Messiah come through humanity? So Satan was a great work. The last few lines of page 56 in the regular quarterly. If Sennacherib had conquered Jerusalem, he would have deported the population in such a way that Judah would have lost its identity. Skipping on a little bit, there would have been no Jewish people for whom the Messiah could be born. So God's thwarting of Sennacherib was to ensure the Messiah's descendants were there to have Jesus have had ancestors.
But also to honor Hezekiah's
and Isaac's and Jacob's and the promises to Abraham, to all the way down.
Yeah.
And the Bible tells us that story of the earth and God's dealing with man throughout history.
Yeah. Thursday's lesson is kind of an interesting lesson. As I was looking at it, I thought, in sickness and in wealth. The first time I read I read health. And
isn't that a marriage vow?
Maybe, but yeah, okay. Anyway, when we look at this and begin to look at what was going on, I want to look at what they put into the first section, where it talks about all the reasons that people were trusting, mistrusting, choosing to follow, but then to go to the bigger picture. We often talk about the great controversy, and we talk about all the things that have to do with how the great controversy works. But this week, several times, in conversation with different people, the idea of Satan and his determination, his active participation in the world has come up in several different instances with several different people. And I find that there are many people who don't see that much of the world's ills that are happening and active are Satan desperately trying to misrepresent God, to draw people away, to make people fuss and fiddle and complain about stuff that in the end it's not going to matter. And to step outside of that, I'm having a hard time sometimes because people draw you in, people distract you, and to stay focused. That was one of the struggles that so many of these people had. And there's a quote from the SDA Bible commentary. Satan was determined to bring about both the death of Hezekiah and the fall of Jerusalem, reasoning no doubt that if Hezekiah were out of the way, his efforts at reform would cease and the fall of Jerusalem could be more readily accomplished. What was Satan's goal? That God would be proved or disproved, I guess is probably a better way to say that.
Well, he'd be proved wrong. He'd be disproved in his character, and then Satan would be proved correct in his accusations about God.
But I don't know what he thought would happen after that. But anyway, but what does the above quote tell us about how important good leadership is for God's people?
Well, it is only by the good leadership that, as that continues, they'll be able to, as Hezekiah said, be of good courage. Buck up, you fellas. We don't need to worry about the 185,000 soldiers. God's got our back. God's got our side. God's got our front. God's got our head. We're good to go. We're good to go.
So when we look at what sign does the Lord give Hezekiah to confirm his faith? When we look at that, God strengthened him to meet the crisis that his father had totally failed at. Ahaz was not able. He had brought nothing but destruction upon Judah. And when we look at this story in 2 Kings 20,
which was not one of my marked texts, so give me a moment.
I know. 2 Kings 20.
I'm getting there. I'm at 19 now.
Okay.
All right, okay. Okay, I'm at 20. 20...
8 through 10.
Verse 8. All right. Hezekiah said to Isaiah, what shall be the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up from this house to the Lord on the third day? Isaiah said, this is the sign to you from the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing that he has promised. I love this. The shadow that is now advancing at 10 intervals shall retreat 10 intervals. Can you imagine a shadow going backwards? To see that? Wow, I think people would go, what's happening? Are we spinning backwards?
Okay, so think about that for just a minute. Not going forward, but going backwards. Like, that would take, like, only an act of God, right? But was that only for Hezekiah? No, that was for all nations around all the known world.
Well,
the world
period.
They would know
something was amiss.
Something
outside themselves.
Changed.
Something big.
And God, I think that's just so awesome that God didn't choose, with Joshua it was, could you make this fleece dry and the ground wet? And then could you make the ground wet and the fleece dry? That was a very tangible thing. But to change the sun,
well,
the whole world would know it. And they would seek why. They would seek to know why.
And that happened because we see a king coming from Babylon to ask what's going on here.
And as you read through, does he talk about God? Does he say, let me tell you about this God that I know. This is what was happening. This is what God did for us. And we can be assured that he's going to continue because this is the sign. You saw it where you were. This is what happened for us. Did he do that? Sadly. No. What a wonderful opportunity to show this great God. Why would he fall for self-glory, self-adulation?
It's an easy thing to do because he had been richly blessed by God, because he was a king who followed God, who followed after God, who had destroyed or attempted to destroy all the evil that his father had done with the nation and idolatry. So God blessed him, just as God had blessed Solomon so many years before, as he followed God's plan. And just like Solomon, he kind of got puffed up a little bit and said, look at all these wonderful things. I have all this gold and all this silver and all these spices and all these precious oils, and look at my armor and look at all my storehouses, and wow.
Yeah. And sadly, he didn't even acknowledge, not even a little bit, of what God had done. I struggle when I look at this. He had been so contrite. In Isaiah 38, he even wrote a psalm. I don't think I've ever been that contrite. To write a psalm, I don't think I have. But when you look at it and you read Isaiah 38 and recognize that, he realized how much he needed God. He talked about his sins. He talked about all the things. He feels like, God, you have forgiven my sins. You have been faithful to me and to the people. And you are worthy of our trust and of all the things that you have promised to us. And you are looking out for the line of the promised Messiah. It's not me, it's the promised Messiah that's still to come. Really? That's the best you could do. When we look at our own glory, when we look at our own, how wonderful we've done, we often go, yeah, that was a good job. Good job. And in this era that we live in, where, you get a trophy for participating, and you get a trophy for, being there and doing your best. We tend to easily fall into that because we're like, yeah, that's me. I did that. And it can bring us to a lot of grief and heartache. On Friday is a great ending to the whole section of this chapter. And I put next to it, read. And so...
she's referring to, of course, the section of prophets and kings.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, just pulling in a few things. Only by direct interposition of God could the shadow on the sundial be made to turn back 10 degrees. And this was to be a sign to Hezekiah and that the Lord had heard his prayer. Accordingly, the prophet cried unto the Lord, and he brought the shadow and 10 degrees backwards by which it had gone down in the dial of Ahaz. And then it goes on to talk about these people coming back. But the last paragraph is significant. But pride and vanity took possession of Hezekiah's heart. In self-exaltation, he laid open to covetous eyes the treasures with which God had enriched his people. The king showed them the house of his precious things, the silver and gold, the spices, the riches, the ointments, and all the house of his armor, and all that was found in his treasures. There was nothing in his house nor in his dominion that Hezekiah showed them not. Not to glorify God did he do this, but to exalt himself in the eyes of foreign princes.
So I wonder if those Babylonians who came and saw those thought, nice plunder to take at a later date.
Yeah.
So he kind of set himself up. Hezekiah's son Manasseh followed in the footsteps of his grandfather. And in 2 Kings 21, it talks a little bit about it, that he unfortunately reestablished all the places of false god worship that Hezekiah had torn down. And it said of Manasseh that he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, following the abominable practices of the nations that the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. So, unfortunately, even with Hezekiah's ability to, through the leadership and divine providence, lead the people back to God, they slipped right back into idolatry and quote, abominable practices.
So we could ask ourselves, well, is it, our leader's fault? But really, it really comes down to us. And so often, we are not cognizant of all that's going on. We aren't paying attention because Satan's best distraction is to get us caught up in all that's going on and all that is causing issues around the world. We get caught up in politics, we get caught up in family matters, we get caught up with COVID, we get caught up with all kinds of things, and we fuss and we fiddle and we don't let what's really important matter. And sometimes part of it is because we're not sure of God. And I think more than anything right now, we as believers need to really be focusing on God, what God has done in the past, what he has said he wants to do. We've looked at Revelation, what he has said he wants to do, prophecy from the beginning to the end, how prophecy has proven him true. And then asking God each day, what is it? What is it that we need to believe? Because Satan is going to give us plenty of opportunities to hear about all the sin, all the things we do wrong, all the problems that come between us and other people.
Hear it long enough and you'll believe it.
Yep, and that's exactly how Satan goes. He will go back and hit you again and again. And if you have asked forgiveness, why can't we believe that when God says, I'm throwing that into the depths of the sea,
which doesn't exist,
as far as from the east to the west,
which you never get,
why can't we believe him? Why do we keep going back to believe something that God says isn't true? Why can't we let God be God? And why can't we trust him to be the God who loves us, who wants to be our God, and wants us to be his people?
After Manasseh's long reign, his son took over very short, and then his grandson, Josiah. And I'm jumping out of the lesson here. Boy King Josiah at age 8 reigned and did what was right in the sight of the Lord and had a revival like there was not seen in the land before. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord and walked in the ways after his father David. He did not turn aside from the right or the left. Despite what happened between Hezekiah and Josiah, the people came back, and God's plan continued in that part of the world, in that part of history. And as we look back on it, what can we learn? That's the point of these lessons. Because we're kind of in that time with Sennacherib. Sabbath's called COVID. Sennacherib, COVID. They kind of rhyme even. So, turn to God. For that's where our faith is strong. That's where it must be. Because what's around us is unsure. We have the promise. We have the assurance. Like Hezekiah's prayer, there is none before you. Trust and believe. I started with pray, get to end, dear. So let's pray.
Father, thank you for your day and for your love. Each day that you give us, we're thankful. And we ask that you continue to build our trust. Give us opportunities to seek you out and trust you more, so that when you call, we will be able to come home. For we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
As Tracy prayed, I was fondly remembered that she began with prayer. We try to trade off to have a little variance. No wonder she was so waiting patiently, like, dear, it's your turn to pray, without saying it. And I went ahead and said it. Do have a wonderful Sabbath day. Until we can study again next week, may you put your hand in the hand of God and rest in his assurances.
Have a good Sabbath.